Hello, my name is Christine and I run a vintage shop called Prima Treasures on Etsy. Today I wanted to talk to you about this lamp that I have, and it's called a student lamp, which seems a little weird because there doesn't appear to be anything about it that is specific to students. But essentially what they meant by that when they call it that is that it's meant for reading. So when you turn it on, the light shines down on the desk or table that it's sitting on. So if you were reading and you had your book underneath it, you wouldn't have anything that would be interfering with the light cast down on the table. There wouldn't be shadows and things of that nature. So anyway, it's essentially a reading lamp or a desk lamp, but it's referred to as a student lamp. And lamps like this, generally from the Victorian era, they were oil lamps, so they were predominantly in use before we had electricity. The reason I wanted to talk about it is because nowadays there's also a pretty significant number of reproductions floating around out there. So if you were interested in a lamp like this, very likely you would come across multiple repro versions before you'd actually see one that was legitimately antique. So I kind of wanted to go over some things you could look for if you're actually interested in an antique student lamp and not a reproduction of a student lamp. So I have another lamp here that I'm going to use as my sort of demo right here. It's not exactly the same because it has a double socket, I guess you'd call that. Sure, let's call it that. Anyway, so the reason I want to show this other example is because it is a repro. I'm going to take this shade off for the purpose of demonstration so I can show you the different areas you can look at to try and figure out whether you're looking at something that's a reproduction or the real thing. So first, I want to point out on this lamp, hopefully you can see, right here is a knob, and this knob has kind of a long stem on it. This is the knob that you would have used to crank the wick inside the oil lamp up and down. And this lamp doesn't have any such knob on it anywhere. You can't see such a thing. So one of the things that you would look for is functional pieces of hardware versus, let's say, decorative or just not even present on the repro lamp. And then the other little knob right here, this little cap, you would have put the oil in this section here, and then this is where you would have poured it in. Again, over here we don't have a reservoir that could hold oil, and we don't have a little screw cap to close it. So sometimes you might see a repro lamp that actually has a bulbous area, but there won't be any cap on it. So that's kind of your hint that it's decorative. It's not really there as a functional oil reservoir. This one, obviously they didn't even bother to put such a thing. The other thing that you can look for, and you can see here, this has a glass chimney on it. Sometimes they will put glass chimneys on these, but in this case you can see that this area here is quite large to hold that. There's little prongs. Less often will there be actual prongs on the repro version because, again, the chimney's just there for decoration. Whereas on this lamp, it was actually, you know, functional, meant to, like, the flame would come out here. So you've got this to kind of help keep soot and such from getting on the decorative shade. See? So that one looks nice and pretty and clean. This one would have been easier to clean. And also, I assume, sort of a safety feature to sort of keep the flame contained to a small area so you wouldn't potentially have open flames that can just, you know, catch on things that happen to be near the lamp. So they both have these rings, which is what you set the shade on, and hopefully you notice when I pulled this shade off that it was resting on this ring. But let me rearrange it a little bit. You can see here that this looks very elaborate. There's a hole here where the socket is. Now this lamp has been converted, so that's why the socket is here, but you can see that it's kind of a mismatch. It's not perfectly fitted in here. There's a gap here, it's a little too tall. So you kind of get the sense that it's sort of, you know, handmade, sort of put together, that it wasn't made like this. And this one also has a gap here, so they may have intended for you to put a chimney here, but you can see that the sockets aren't really going up very high. And to me, the telltale part on this lamp is that this piece here has a hole perfectly fitted where the knob that you would turn the light. Now, if you had an oil lamp, why would they put a hole there? They wouldn't. So the fact that this was made with a hole exactly where your little socket knob goes, you know, that seems to be a tell for this piece was made to fit with this piece. And then here we have this just random decorative piece, but it doesn't appear to do anything. So that's another thing you'd want to look for is, do the parts on this lamp look like they had a job of some sort or a function? This does not. So, you know, we can kind of look at that as a, let's call it a red flag. Then over here, you know, I've got too many parts going on at this point. You've got a knob down here, and I can tell you that this is probably what we would consider an awkward spot for an on-off knob. But again, that kind of gives you a hint that, well, it's in a weird spot because this was not made to have a knob for an electric socket. So essentially when the person converted it, what they did was they just drill a hole and they put their little socket right there. And then when you flip this upside down, you can see that it's wired kind of weirdly. There's wires in here, but you know, they're kind of loose. They're not covered up nicely. You can see here where they drilled through and they put this bit on the other side of the knob. So essentially they're just making this work. But it's, you know, kind of handmade looking. And again, that boils down to the fact that this lamp was created, manufactured as an oil lamp. So all this extra hardware, you know, that's not something they would have tried to consider when they were designing it. So essentially when you have a real oil lamp, you want to look for signs that someone has converted it to electric. And so that's where you get sort of the ad hoc nature of the hardware needed to run a lamp, which is the socket, the knob, the wiring underneath, kind of, and I'll show you here. You can see on this side, they just kind of stuck that wire through one of the decorative holes in the bottom. Whereas over here, on this lamp, oh, I don't think that's showing up in the camera. Hold it up a little bit. Oh, we might have a catastrophe. There's a hole in the base for it, but the base itself is covered. So it's pretty clear when they made this lamp, I mean, it's covered, but that, you know, this whole base was made to deal with the cord. So the design of the base seems to match the wiring and everything that's going through it. So those are some of the things that you can look at to kind of make a determination whether you think something is a reproduction or an original oil lamp from 1800s, maybe early 1900s. A lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times, the knob here will have the name of the maker of the lamp. Sometimes around this area you can find very tiny, you have to potentially get out a magnifying glass and look, but you would have like patent numbers or manufacturer's name. You're not real likely to see that on a more modern lamp because lamps are not something that continued to get marked once we moved into electricity. Sure, high-end ones are, but mass-produced middle-class type lamps, not really. So, you know, one of the things that can help you is if you see some markings, and again, they'll normally be on the knobs or on this, they call this the burner, and that's the reason it has so many holes, because you need oxygen. So, you know, you'd have a lot of holes here, but you can see on this lamp, there are no holes anywhere. Well, if you were trying to light a flame here, you'd need somewhere for air to circulate. So this, again, makes sense for what we know the function of an antique lamp would be. But a lot of times, as I say, you can look for markings here, and that'll give you the name of the person, company that made it, and it can also give you a timeline. Sometimes they'll have a model number. So that gives you something you can kind of research to confirm that something's old. But, you know, it's not a given, so I wouldn't necessarily rely only on that and rule something else if you don't have any marks, because you can use some of the other things that we talked about to give yourself confirmation one way or the other. So anyway, I hope that you've learned something helpful today, and I appreciate you watching. Thank you.